Get your black ass out of here before I call the cops. It was a warm, sunny afternoon along the highway, the kind of day where the road shimmered with heat and travelers longed for a break. The rest stop was alive with movement. Families spilled out of minivans, stretching their legs. Truck drivers leaned against their rigs, sipping coffee from paper cups. Children laughed as they ran toward the vending machines, while tired travelers strolled toward the restrooms. Sitting apart from the crowd was a middle-aged black man in a neatly pressed suit. His demeanor was calm, almost distinguished. He wasn't there to draw attention. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the quiet. He sat on a bench, hands folded, gazing out at the parking lot as if gathering his thoughts before returning to the road. This man had been driving for hours. The bench, the shade, and the brief pause in the journey felt like a small gift. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He wasn't disturbing a soul. Yet his stillness, his composure, and perhaps something more unspoken, soon attracted the wrong kind of attention. 2 police officers pulled into the lot, their cruiser rolling to a stop near the entrance. They weren't there for a break. Dispatch had sent them to investigate a call. Someone had reported a suspicious man hanging around. The description was vague, almost meaningless. But the moment their eyes landed on the suited man sitting quietly by himself, their suspicion locked in. Without hesitation, they decided he must be the one. The officers stepped out of the car, their posture sharp, authoritative. The man on the bench noticed them approaching. He offered a polite nod, the kind you might give to strangers walking by. Instead of returning the courtesy, the officers closed in with an edge in their voices. "Sir, what are you doing here?" one asked, his tone cutting through the hum of the rest stop. The man looked up, unfazed. "Just taking a break," he replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" His answer was simple, reasonable. But the officers weren't satisfied. To them, his calmness seemed evasive. His composure only deepened their suspicion. They pressed further, asking where he had come from, where he was going, why he was there alone. Each question felt less like curiosity and more like interrogation. The man's responses were measured, steady. He wasn't confrontational. He wasn't defensive. Still, his very presence seemed to irritate them. Within minutes, the officers demanded his identification. He provided it without resistance, yet they seemed unsatisfied, flipping it back and forth as if searching for a flaw. One officer began patting down his jacket, while the other rifled through his small bag. The man remained seated, his voice steady. "Is all this really necessary?" That was all it took. Their patience snapped. The words suspicious and non-compliant seemed to echo in their heads, justifying what they were about to do. "Stand up!" one officer ordered. Before the man could fully rise to his feet, cold steel cuffs clamped around his wrists. The sharp click of metal closing shut drew the attention of everyone nearby. Gasps rippled through the rest stop. A mother pulled her child closer. Truckers craned their necks to see. Several bystanders pulled out their phones, hitting record as the scene unfolded. Whispers darted across the parking lot. "What did he do? Why are they arresting him?" He was just sitting there. Through it all, the man did not resist. His eyes were steady, his expression calm. He stood silently in the grip of 2 officers who believed they had caught someone suspicious. But the truth was far different. This man, calm, dignified and now in handcuffs, knew something the officers did not. Something that would soon turn this ordinary afternoon into a story no one at that rest stop would ever forget, because the man they had just cuffed wasn't just another traveler. He was someone far more powerful than they imagined, and in time they would learn that lesson the hard way. To the officers, he was just another suspect, a man who didn't quite fit into the rest stop picture they expected. But the reality was far from what they imagined. The man in the handcuffs was Judge Robert Hamilton, one of the most respected judges in the state's legal system. Known for his sharp mind, calm presence, and unwavering sense of justice, he had presided over dozens of high-profile cases. Lawyers admired his fairness, defendants respected his integrity, and colleagues trusted his judgment. Ironically, the very officers who had just cuffed him were scheduled to appear before him in court only a week later. Their names were already on his docket, tied to a misconduct case that had raised serious questions about their behavior in the line of duty. And now, fate had delivered them directly into his hands, though they didn't know it yet. Judge Hamilton could have revealed his identity in an instant. A simple, "I'm Judge Hamilton," would have stopped the situation cold. The cuffs would have come off, the tone would have shifted, and the officers would have scrambled to cover their mistake. But he didn't. Instead, he chose silence. Not out of pride, not out of arrogance, but out of something deeper. A desire to see, with his own eyes, how these officers treated someone when they thought no one of influence was watching. For years, he had listened to stories in his courtroom, men and women describing encounters where they felt judged, disrespected, or mistreated. He had seen evidence, heard testimonies, and handed down rulings. But this was different. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sitting behind a bench in a robe. He was standing in the shoes of those very people he had sworn to protect. The officers kept circling him with questions. Their tone was sharp, their expressions suspicious. "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Why are you just sitting here?" Each time, Judge Hamilton responded with calm, measured words. "I was on a long drive. I stopped to take a rest. That is all." But his composure, his refusal to panic, only seemed to frustrate them further. One officer leaned toward the other, muttering under his breath, "Something doesn't feel right about this guy." They were correct, though not in the way they thought. Something about him was different, yes, but it wasn't criminal. It wasn't suspicious. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years holding the law in his hands, a man who understood justice more deeply than they ever would in that moment. If they had looked closer, maybe they would have noticed the details, the dignified way he spoke, the precision in his tone, the sense of authority that clung to him even as he stood in cuffs. But blinded by assumptions, they saw none of it. To them, he was just another man who didn't belong. But to everyone else, and soon to the officers themselves, he was the man they could least afford to treat this way, because in just a matter of days, they wouldn't be standing over him at a rest stop. They would be standing in his courtroom, facing the consequences of their choices. And the irony of that moment would echo far louder than the click of those handcuffs. By now, a small crowd had formed at the rest stop. People who had been sipping coffee or stretching their legs now stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Mothers whispered to their children. Truckers shook their heads. And several younger travelers had their phones raised high, capturing every second. The sight of a well-dressed black man in handcuffs, surrounded by officers, was jarring enough. But whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some recognized the man's face. Others weren't entirely sure, but felt they had seen him before, on television, in newspapers, or perhaps in a courtroom. Finally, one bold bystander, a woman in her 40s with a firm voice, stepped forward and spoke words that cut through the air like thunder. "Do you even know who that is? That's Judge Hamilton." The effect was immediate. The crowd buzzed with shock. Heads turned, murmurs grew louder, and the officers stiffened. One of them blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard. "Judge, what?" the officer stammered, his voice suddenly losing its authority. The man in the cuffs raised his head and looked them both directly in the eyes. His expression was calm, but his words carried a weight that made the entire rest stop fall silent. "Yes," he said evenly. "I am Judge Robert Hamilton, and I believe I'll be seeing you both in my courtroom very soon." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the sound of highway traffic seemed to fade into the background. The officers, who just moments earlier had been so sure of themselves, now looked shaken. Their authority, once absolute, seemed to drain away in an instant. They hurriedly pulled him aside, fumbling to confirm what the bystander had said. One officer nervously searched through his ID again, as though he might have missed the truth the first time. The other muttered something under his breath, disbelief etched across his face, and then the realization hit them like a tidal wave. It was true. The man standing before them, the man they had handcuffed in front of dozens of witnesses, wasn't just anyone. He was a respected judge, and not just any judge. He was the judge assigned to their misconduct case. Their faces went pale. One officer swallowed hard, while the other seemed to forget how to speak at all. The cuffs came off in a rush, the sound of metal unclipping almost desperate. "Sir, we didn't know," one officer stammered. "We were just doing our job." "Yes, Judge, please understand," the other chimed in, his words tumbling over themselves. "This was a mistake. Nothing personal. We didn't mean—" But their apologies were hollow. Rushed, nervous, and unconvincing, and everyone around knew the truth. The videos kept recording, capturing every second, the shift from arrogance to fear, from dominance to desperation. Witnesses shook their heads, whispering they only saw his skin, not the man, because the truth was painfully clear. Judge Hamilton wasn't treated with suspicion because of his actions. He wasn't searched because of his behavior. He wasn't cuffed because he posed a threat. He was treated that way because of how he looked. And now, the entire crowd, and soon the entire world through those recordings, had witnessed it with their own eyes. The officers had no idea that their mistake at this rest stop would echo far beyond this parking lot. They had exposed something bigger than themselves, the reality of prejudice, the danger of assumptions, and the irony of treating a judge as if he were a criminal. And deep down, as their shaky apologies trailed off, they knew one thing for certain. Their day in court had just gotten a lot worse. A week later, the courthouse was packed. The story of Judge Hamilton's encounter at the rest stop had spread far and wide. The videos taken by bystanders had gone viral online, sparking heated debates across the state and even beyond. News anchors discussed it nightly. Community leaders weighed in, and countless voices on social media demanded accountability. Now, the officers who once stood over Judge Hamilton with handcuffs in hand were about to face him again. But this time, the setting was different. This time, they weren't in uniform. They weren't the ones in control. They were defendants, standing in a courtroom filled with reporters, activists, and citizens waiting to see what justice would look like. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. As the officers entered, they kept their heads low. Their crisp uniforms had been replaced by plain suits that made them look smaller, less authoritative. They didn't dare look toward the bench where Judge Hamilton now sat, wearing the black robe that symbolized his authority. He didn't need to glare at them. He didn't need to remind them of what had happened. The weight of their actions was already pressing down on them, and the entire room could see it. Judge Hamilton opened the proceedings with the same calm dignity he was known for. He did not let anger guide him. He did not seek to humiliate or belittle. That wasn't his way. Instead, he let the facts and the truth speak for themselves. He reminded the courtroom of the events at the rest stop, not for his own sake, but for what the incident represented. "What happened that afternoon," he began, his voice firm but measured, "is not just about me. It is not about my position or my title. It is about every person who has ever been judged unfairly. Every individual who has been stopped, questioned, or handcuffed, not because of what they were doing, but because of assumptions about who they are." The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their lawyer tried to interject, but the judge's words cut through the room with undeniable force. "This," Judge Hamilton continued, "is why we are here today. Justice must be blind. Blind to race, blind to appearance, blind to prejudice. But too often we see justice distorted by fear, by bias, by the quick judgments of those who carry authority." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Members of the public nodded. Some even clapped quietly before the bailiff silenced the room. The officers looked down, their faces pale. The authority they once carried at that rest stop was gone. They were no longer the ones asking questions. They were the ones answering for their actions. When the proceedings reached their conclusion, Judge Hamilton remained steady. He did not throw them in jail. Instead, disciplinary actions were ordered. The officers would face suspension, mandatory retraining, and a permanent mark on their records. Some in the public wanted harsher punishment. But Judge Hamilton's decision carried a different kind of power. He wasn't just sentencing two officers, he was sending a message. As he closed the case, his final words echoed through the room. "No one," he said, his voice clear and commanding. Not even those who wear the badge stands above accountability. The law is for everyone, and justice belongs to all. And with that, the gavel struck. The officers walked out of that courtroom humbled, their careers forever changed. The rest stop incident that began with handcuffs had ended with a lesson, one that would ripple through the police department, the community, and the nation. Because in the end, Judge Hamilton had proven something greater than authority. He had proven that true justice requires courage, fairness, and the refusal to bow to prejudice. And the world had been watching every step of the way. After the case concluded, Judge Hamilton's story didn't just fade away. It spread like wildfire. News anchors replayed the courtroom footage, the rest stop videos, and clips of his powerful words. Headlines across the nation carried his name, sparking conversations in homes, schools, workplaces, and even within police departments themselves. On social media, the story became a lightning rod. Hashtags trended overnight. Some people called it poetic justice, the perfect twist of fate that showed two officers what it feels like to be judged unfairly. Others saw it as something much deeper, a painful reminder that no matter the title, wealth, or position, black men in America still face suspicion for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Comment sections and talk shows lit up with debates. Was this an isolated incident or part of a much bigger problem? Could the system ever truly change, or would stories like Judge Hamilton's keep repeating? Through all the noise, Judge Hamilton remained steady. He wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity or a viral sensation. When asked about the incident during a television interview, his response was calm and direct, carrying the weight of experience. "What happened to me," he said, "is not unique. It happens every single day to countless people who don't wear a robe, who don't sit on a bench, and who don't have the power to hold people accountable. The difference is, I had the platform to shine a light on it." Those words hit harder than any headline. For many, they were a wake-up call. The judge wasn't just telling his story. He was speaking for the countless others who didn't have cameras rolling, who didn't have a courtroom to walk back into, and who didn't have the chance to prove their dignity in front of the world. The irony of the situation made it unforgettable. Two officers, convinced they had caught a suspicious man, had in fact exposed their own biases. And by cuffing a judge, they inadvertently turned a quiet rest stop encounter into a national conversation about justice, equality, and accountability. Communities began using his story in training sessions, workshops, and classrooms. Activists cited it as proof of systemic issues. Even some officers admitted it was a turning point, a humbling reminder that authority must always be exercised with caution and fairness. But perhaps the most powerful image came afterward, when Judge Hamilton returned to his courtroom. The very same man who had been forced to stand in handcuffs walked back to his bench not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. He carried himself with the same calm dignity he had shown at the rest stop, but now his presence spoke louder. He was more than just a judge now. He was living proof that fairness belongs to everyone, not just the powerful, not just the privileged, but to every individual who walks through the doors of justice. And that, in the end, was the greatest lesson. A quiet afternoon at a rest stop had become a national reckoning. A pair of handcuffs had sparked a conversation bigger than two officers. And Judge Hamilton's story became a reminder that while prejudice can bind, justice has the power to set free. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.